Hello, greetings and welcome to this video. So, I'm going to do, I did a video, Does the Brain Produce Consciousness? And I was presenting the way that Bernardo Kastrup argues that the brain doesn't produce consciousness and that, in fact, under analytic idealism, the mind is fundamental. So the mind, the consciousness is what is the ground of everything, and then the all that we see is inside consciousness. So the brain doesn't produce consciousness. The brain is, because the brain is inside consciousness. It's like in a dream. So when you're in a dream, you have a brain in the dream, and the brain in the dream doesn't actually produce the consciousness of the dream. As much as all the scientists in the dream may say, we've studied the brain, your brain, and other brains, and we know for a fact there's a lot of correlation. When you wake up, you realize the brain wasn't producing the consciousness at all. They didn't have the whole picture. So now, it could be part of the problem is that some people think that science has the whole picture, and I'm sure that scientists don't think this, but maybe people do think that science has all the answers and science has demonstrated that the brain produces consciousness. Certainly there are science news headlines that say these kinds of things, but really there is, as David Chalmers says, there's this hard problem of consciousness. And I don't know if the people who watched the video that I made know about this. I did talk about it in the video, but maybe they didn't watch the video and they just commented attacking that, saying that of course the brain produces consciousness. It's been demonstrated. The brain, has a correlation with what happens, but it's not. But they don't know. They really don't know how the brain produces consciousness at the moment. There's no proof. Secondly, lots of people were saying, I have no proof that the brain doesn't produce consciousness. Now, there was a guy who commented that it's not such a big deal. It's not a mystery wrapped up in an enigma, he said. It was very clever. It was a funny comment. And he said, what produces consciousness then? Is it your kneecaps? And it's a really good point, but it does show something. So I responded, maybe he's onto something. Maybe people without kneecaps have no interior experience, no subjective experience of the world. The lights are on, but there's no one home. And but how are we going to test it? And that's the thing. The kneecap could be the thing that's producing consciousness. Maybe people without kneecaps don't have an interior life, but we can't prove it. But I don't need to demonstrate that the kneecap doesn't produce consciousness. If somebody asserts that the kneecap produces consciousness, it's down to them to demonstrate it, to provide evidence. If I'm claiming that the brain doesn't produce consciousness, and I can present a certain number of cases where the reduction in brain activity is correlated with increased subjective experience, then it looks like the brain is a filter rather than producing consciousness, because how can you have less brain activity and yet more subjective experience if it's been produced by the brain? Now, and this happens with psychedelics, with apnea, pilots have been under, and also NDEs, near-death experiences. So in all these cases, the brain doesn't have oxygen, or the brain is, suppressed, and yet there's a very vivid subjective experience. Now, somebody made a good point that what happens is you suppress the parts of the brain that control it, and then because you're not controlling the brain, it goes, it lets loose. So as if the brain is incredibly, it produces an incredible experience, but the parts of it actually control that experience and limit it to make it this normal view of the world that we have now. And so if you take a psychedelic, it suppresses that, and therefore you get the full vivid experience of the brain as it's working normally. Now, this doesn't really fit with evolution, because why would we evolve a massive energy thing that consumes a lot of energy in the brain and then something else which suppresses it? It could be. I don't know. It might be. But certainly with the NDEs, near-death experiences, there is no brain activity, and they say, oh, well, maybe it's as the brain dies, it kind of, there's little energy, and it's kind of, that is what produces this intense experience. But there's just not enough. There's not enough activity in the brain when we need so much of the brain to produce this visual world. Then, it's not... you can't explain it. It's if you're trying to grasping at straws and trying to say that that's what produced the near-death experience, you're really desperate. If you really believe the brain produces the experience and you can switch it all off and it still produces the experience because a tiny amount of activity produces all the experience you need and more, there's something wrong with your theory. Now, so let's look at what consciousness is. I think some people were mixed up also about. They were saying that there's all these things that the brain produces that does, and we've correlated them, but correlation doesn't mean causation. And they were saying things like, when a relative, a grandmother of somebody had dementia, her consciousness changed completely. Now, yes, her personality changed, her memories, all of these things changed. And my mum had dementia too, so I know what it's like. But yeah, thankfully her personality didn't change. But this this is not the consciousness. When we're talking about the consciousness, we're talking about this feeling of being awake. We are, your ChatGPT or some other AI could be very good at speaking and imitating a human, even with empathy and things like this. But there's no one, we know it's not awake. And I did give the arguments that Bernardo Kastrup presents against complexity causing this, but I think some people didn't watch the video. They just gave these comments that it's through complexity. But Bernardo Kastrup gives arguments against complexity, that if you put legs on a centipede, more and more legs, it won't suddenly start to fly. If you do an incredibly complex computer, it will just be a complex computer. This action of waking up, having this subjective experience, suddenly from this point of view, where everything's contained, this is what we're talking about with consciousness. And this won't arise from a very, very complex computer. Look at him for the arguments. It's better than I can put forward. So, so what is consciousness then? So consciousness, in the context I'm talking about, is the subjective experience. The fact that you're aware, you're awake, you are... The Arindam Chakrabarti, a philosopher, highly respected, he says that consciousness is that which everything objects to. So everything presents itself to consciousness. You can never actually find consciousness because everything you look for is an object. The subject is something which can never be found. So, but is that which holds everything, and in a way, is that which everything is made of. Because like in a dream, you are the dream. Consciousness is the dream. The person in the dream, the person's brain in the dream, the other people in the dream, the person's subjective experience, everything is the person. It's all this consciousness. So that's what we're talking about with consciousness. Now, there's a few different varieties. Now, there is phenomenal consciousness, which is just being conscious, just being awake. Now, I say awake, but I do also mean in a dream. You are also awake. I know it sounds strange, but so this feeling of being here is what consciousness is, and metaconsciousness is you're aware of being aware. So consciousness means phenomenal consciousness is you're aware, and metaconsciousness is you're aware of being aware. And some people say that there are studies that say that maybe in sleep we're aware, but we're not aware of being aware, which is why we don't realize the fact that the dream is so strange, and we don't cotton on to the fact that it's a dream. Now, I wrote my dreams down for a year, and they were rubbish, but they were very. Sometimes they were very vivid and had very clear. Sometimes I noticed colors. Sometimes I noticed smells. Of course, there were sounds. But sometimes I think I wasn't metaconscious. I wasn't really aware of being aware. I was aware, but things were going on. But I became aware of this when I woke up. So I'm not sure if I was really metaconscious in the dream. I might have just been phenomenally conscious. Who knows? But that was an observation. Now, Bernardo Kastrup was also saying that another way to explain phenomenal consciousness is maybe if I say to you now, can you feel your toes? Your attention goes to your toes, and you can feel your toes, I assume. Now you're metaconscious of the toes. You're aware of being aware of your toes. But before I said that, you were still aware of your toes. But it wasn't actually in metaconsciousness. So you weren't really aware that you were aware of your toes, but you were aware of your toes. So that may be the difference. Now, whether or not this base consciousness is metaconsciousness or not is a question in different forms of Advaita Vedanta. You have, in Advaita Vedanta, they see consciousness as being phenomenal consciousness. So the thing which is everything, God, you are without even this reflection, this kind of reflected consciousness, this metaconsciousness. But then in other traditions, Kashmiri Shaivism, they believe that this consciousness, this fundamental consciousness of the universe, is actually meta-conscious. It's already aware of being aware. Now, of course, I don't know the answer. I'm just putting these things forward. Now, one thing that's important to know when we talk about consciousness in this context of non-duality and Advaita Vedanta is that when you are in deep sleep, you're still conscious. So this consciousness doesn't go. It's on all the time. But when you're in deep sleep and you don't have any dreams, you are aware of absence rather than there being an absence of awareness. So you're just aware of this blackness, whatever, or nothing, and it's punctuated by nothing. So there's no actions, there's nothing happening. So when you wake up, you felt you slept well. So that's a sign that you were in some way conscious. You didn't just go from dream sleep and then suddenly wake up. Or our experience of sleeping would be, I go to sleep, I dream, and then I wake up. Or maybe I dream, and then I have another dream, and then I wake up. But we don't have this experience. Many cultures throughout the world, even going back to before we had brain scanners and all of this, they had this idea of dreamless sleep. So there is something there. We feel that, oh yeah, I slept a bit and then there was nothing for a bit. I slept well during that part. The dream sleep is normally not the satisfying bit, it's the deep, dreamless sleep. So even though we are unconscious, in this teaching, you're not, the consciousness isn't gone. You're still conscious, but there's nothing you're conscious of. So now another point that somebody made is that they said, I became conscious when I was born, but we don't know that. I became conscious, I assume, when I was born, but in fact my first memories, in the same way I can't remember my deep sleep, my first memories were around when I was 3 years old. Before that, when I was 2 and 1, I'm pretty much sure I existed. I'm pretty much sure that I was conscious. People tell me this. And plus, we start counting from 0. So we go 0, 1, 2, 3. So I definitely existed, and I probably was conscious, but my memories don't go back that far. So when the guy said, I became conscious when I was born, we don't know. He could have been conscious for 10 days before he was born, or for 1,000 years before he was born, or there could have never been a time when he was not conscious. So this consciousness, just because we can't remember it, doesn't mean that it wasn't there, you know? It's I can't remember when I was 2. But I know I was here. I know I existed. In the same way, if we're saying that the brain exists within consciousness and is a representation of something mental, then the consciousness is the container, is the thing that was always there and will always be here. So I was trying to answer various points in this. Just one last point that somebody said. He said that consciousness, you may as well call it a banana, because if it's everything, it kind of loses its meaning. And I do agree. If it's everything, it's being itself, value, and just this consciousness is all there is, it's not really consciousness, because consciousness is connected to a mind. This is how we understand consciousness. So you may as well call it a banana. Well, you may as well call it God, universal mind, or a banana. The only problem with the banana is the banana's limited. So the banana has limitations. It's limited by size, time, and by object, in that it's a banana and it isn't anything else. Now, the idea of Brahman, this ultimate reality, which is existence, consciousness, and bliss, it is consciousness itself, and it exists, and it is the source of all value. This is unlimited. So it has no limits in time, space, or object. So it's, unfortunately, we can't call it a banana. We can call it Brahman. It's the word that they've given to this in Advaita Vedanta. But it was a good point, what the guy made. And I, because of this, I don't really... We talk about idealism, everything's in the mind, but I think it's much deeper than that. It's... there is... that what is here. And we call it consciousness because we've gone from the idea of having a brain and this being produced by the brain, so this is consciousness. But really, it's really the ground of being. Meister Eckhart, this bishop who lived a very long time ago, he was a mystic, and he spoke of the ground of being. I think this idea of consciousness, although it has been used in Advaita Vedanta for thousands of years, kind of the idea of consciousness is a more recent thing that we're trying to understand nowadays, because we think we can clearly understand everything with science, but science can't understand everything. There'll always be more. Lord Kelvin said that in the century before they discovered relativity, he said that science is finished. There is nothing left, and there's no point becoming a scientist because we know everything now. The only two small problems, he said, were the black body radiation and something else. And these two problems, they expanded in the 20th century into relativity and quantum mechanics. So from this, and these changed everything. These changed completely everything, how we saw science. And this is going to happen again. It's sure to happen again because science is providing models and science is flexible and science is great because of this. And science eventually is going to drop materialism because of the hard problem of consciousness, and they're going to adopt panpsychism and think that maybe consciousness is fundamental with the atoms and the matter. Eventually they will move to idealism because the more they look for matter, the less they find. Subatomic particles have got no extension in space. The only way we know they're there is because of the way that we imply that they're there because of fields and energy. And we imply that they're there because of other things that we imply. So we see the effect on, we imply that something's here because we see the effect on something else that we've also implied that is there. So even at the moment, it's not pretty solid matter. They've even changed the definition of matter. They haven't really changed it, but it's how, when something has an inertia, so it doesn't move immediately. So, and this is how we define, because we can't define matter as having any space or any mass, of course. We've changed mass because it's a mathematical point. It has no extension. So we've changed the definition of mass itself to be just when something has an inertia. And then if you look at quantum physics, it's all quantum possibilities and things that exist in superpositions, and it's all a probability. So where are all these probabilities and inferences of this thing that we're trying to look for? It's not very solid at the moment. I think it's just going to get worse. It won't get worse. They'll just eventually accept idealism. So there we go. That's a prediction. Thank you for watching. I know this is a bit of a mess, but I imagine nobody will ever see it, like most of my other videos. But that one that I did, Does the Brain Produce Consciousness, was really big. It got lots and lots of comments. So I just wanted to do this response video. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.